I bet we're going to get some more analysis on the situation in Syria now. We can cross live to Emma Beals from the European Institute of Peace. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24. I'm going to come from where we left off with Doug there. The question on everyone's lips, what is going to happen next? Is it going to be Hayat Tahrir al-Sham that's going to try to assume power in Syria?
Well, those conversations are ongoing at the moment. So you've seen some images emerge today of HTS's civilian branch meeting with former government, so the regime government, not the Assad family and those sort of cronies, but people who were, ministers, to try to talk about, a peaceful transition of the functions of the state. You also have some conversations going on between these various armed factions about, who will be doing what. But of course, we also have the UN-led peace process with the political opposition on the Syrian side and a whole lot of civil society as well. And then, this has kind of tipped things upside down because these armed factions, as they were going along, were calling all sorts of different communities of different sects and backgrounds and saying, we mean you no harm, please sort of don't fight us. And that's exactly what happened. So you've seen in Tartus and Latakia and, places that were thought to be regime strongholds, in part because of politics, but also in part because of background, also having cooperated with this. So, the UN-led peace process will probably need to take place, going back to this idea of a transitional government that is representative of all of those groups within civil society, not just the armed factions, to make sure that this next phase is peaceful, that the things of looking at the constitution and how the country is going to be run under civilian rule will be representative of all Syrians, but also safe for all Syrians as well.
All right, Emma Beals, I'm just going to ask you to hold on there for a moment because we've just made contact with our senior reporter in Damascus in Syria. We're just going to check in with him to see what the situation is like there. James Andre is on the line with us. James, what is the mood there in Damascus? Is it still joy reigning, or are we getting a feeling of uncertainty?
Well, look, it's very much joy. I'm in Umayyad Square in the center of Damascus. And indeed, what I'm seeing here is a lot of celebratory gunfire, families out walking around. There's a group of people who are standing on a T-72 tank that's parked here. So, a tank that was obviously part of Bashar al-Assad's army, the regime's army. And indeed, people basically just very, very happy, celebrating on the way in here. What we saw also was basically a clear road, no soldiers from the Syrian army whatsoever. We just drove right in. We saw groups of people who had been in forced exile, some of them for over 10 years, arrive, jump out of their cars, prostrate and kiss the soil of their country, telling us that, that it was their dream. One lady said, I did not imagine I would see it again before my death. So obviously a lot of joy here. Also, I've been speaking to people here on the square. One woman we interviewed with the team who told us that we asked her if she was worried for, given that it is an Islamist coalition taking power. She said, no, I'm not worried for the future of women in Syria. I was much more worried before under the regime. Also, we spoke to one of the rebel commanders from Idlib who was here with his men, indeed meeting the population. So, of course, for him, it was quite an achievement to manage to come to Damascus, obviously in this blitz. This military blitz with indeed the Syrian forces, and this is what he told us, who were not holding their positions, was basically leaving their positions, leaving their guns, and basically running away. So indeed they were able to advance very rapidly given the context. He was telling us as well that, yes, the celebratory gunfire is not exactly the kind of image that the new rulers, if you will, of Syria want to show. So he was telling me that, you can't stop people from celebrating today because obviously it is such an historic and important day. But he said, as soon as tomorrow they were going to ban for celebratory gunfire and try and confiscate the weapons of those who wouldn't comply. So indeed, trying there again to show control of the city and the situation. And of course, you can hear the gunfire behind me right now. And of course, amidst both this joy, which is also some form of chaos, try and take control of this country where we've seen a lot of people along the road ripping down the pictures of Bashar al-Assad, destroying his statue. So yes, very much a feeling that this country, or at least this is at this stage, there is joy and the feeling of liberation.
All right, James Andre reporting for us there live from Damascus, along with some live pictures on your screens there of Damascus. We're going to go back to Emma Beals from the European Institute of Peace, who's still with us. I wanted to ask you, HTS is a designated terrorist organization by the US and other states. So how will the outgoing and incoming administrations in Washington deal with this if the group is to assume power in Syria?
Well, I think it's unlikely that any one group will assume power. And HTS, when they took Aleppo, had said that they would, leave the city and for there to be civilian rule there. So I don't think that their plan is to try to take over wholesale, because I think they understand the context better than that. And they certainly weren't the only armed group that made this happen. And therefore, they understand that that won't go over very well. But I do know that countries are looking at whether or not the designation should be maintained, because over the last while, HTS have undergone a major sort of transition in how they operate. They have removed away from any kind of transnational terrorism. They have gone after other factions in Idlib who have those aspirations. And that's been happening over a very long time, not just very recently. What we've also seen in the way that they've conducted this campaign, and of course, the proof will be in the pudding. We will see how this plays out over the coming weeks and months. But they have been very conciliatory to other sects, religions, groups, sort of saying we're all Syrian, very much a Syrian first message, allowing, Christian communities to continue their worship and not bothering anyone in that respect. Today, we've seen some suggestions that they're also saying it would be forbidden for any of their fighters to talk to women about how they should be dressing or conducting themselves. And those kind of things would really indicate quite a huge shift, quite an understanding that they're not going to be able to come in and really push a deeply conservative role. And I think that those sorts of signs are the things that people who are in charge of these sorts of designations would be looking to as to whether or not this is a group that they would be able to deal with, even if they form part of a government in the future.
All right, and I think, Doug, did you have a question?
Yeah, quick question, Emma. Just curious, we've heard that, Assad fled and was offered sanctuary in Moscow by the Kremlin. And I'm just curious what you make of that. Obviously, Russia, for many years, being the backer and perhaps the power that enabled Assad to remain in power from 2015 on. What were Russia's motives for giving him sanctuary? How much of a defeat do you see this for Russia's policy in this region?
Well, I think we heard at the beginning of the revolution this idea of Assad or we burn the country. And that's basically what has happened over the last nearly 14 years. He burned the country to protect himself. And so I think it's very clear that he was prepared to do that. And so, that kind of deal making, I think, was ostensibly because Russia and Iran did not want to come in and fight for him, but knew that there was, a strong possibility that he would be inclined to fight for himself. And none of the regional states, Russia or Iran, by the time, these rebel groups reached Damascus, wanted to see street-to-street fighting in Damascus, the collapse of that city, violence across there, and everything that would mean. And so that kind of deal, I imagine, was primarily about making sure that whatever came next, it did not involve, the total degradation of order in the country, because it has been so long. Russia was talking to rebel groups about protecting their own interests, and getting Assad out, I believe, helped them to do that. But in terms of a defeat, it's huge. He has been maintaining Assad's rule has been a central part of their foreign policy for a long time. It's obviously not the only priority for either Russia or Iran. But this kind of catastrophic defeat so quickly, and sort of having to evacuate this fellow out after everything that they had sort of done to help preserve his role in order to preserve their own interests will be, extremely embarrassing for them.
All right, Emma Beals from the European Institute of Peace. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.
Thanks for having me.